Our next guest here on the program, there's a big battle in the Republican primary, Republican runoff in Texas 13. Which if you're in Texas 13, you're probably in the listening area of KFYO. We've had a lot of feedback on this race, and joining us on the phones this morning, one of the participants, one of the candidates in that July runoff, Josh Winegarner, joining us here for the first time. Mr. Winegarner, welcome to the show, and how are you doing today?
Good morning, Chad. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing great.
Great,
y'all?
Great to have you on. I know y'all have a debate today, in Wichita Falls, correct?
That's correct.
Well, for those who may not know a lot about you, let's start there and just kind of give a little bit about your history, your bio, and why you wanted to run for Texas 13.
Sure. So, Chad, I grew up in Spearman, top of the Texas Panhandle. Graduated from there and went down to Abilene for college, went to McMurray 4 years, went over to Hardin-Simmons for a year, and figured out I didn't need a PhD, I needed a JOB. And I had the opportunity to go up to Washington and work for Senator Phil Gramm, worked for him for 2 years. And when he retired, Senator Cornyn hired me, and I worked for him for 4 years and did agriculture, small business, and trade policy for the senator. And in 2006, I was able to move back home and work for the Texas Cattle Feeders Association, and I've been with them ever since. I've got 2 kids. My wife and I and our kids live south of Canyon. We've got a small Angus operation where we also run a few head of cattle, and we're part of our community. We belong to Hillside Christian Church there in Canyon, and my wife is on the school board, and we're just part of our community. And I had the when I first heard that Mac might be retiring, I started asking around to people I thought would be good at running to be his replacement, and they all told me that they weren't interested, but they all suggested that I should run. And that kind of set me back on my heels because I'd never thought about running for elected office. It just wasn't something that was ever in a career plan for me. But when they said that, and I respect these people a great deal, caused me and my wife to go home and reflect and pray about it. And it happened all right here together, but then within the next 3 weeks at church, it was services were about using the gifts and the talents that God gave you to give back, to honor Him, and to help others. And then, that really caused us to pray even harder and think about it. And then the last one was, well, when I tell you what I want you to do it. So that's really what pushed me in. I think I have, having grown up in the district, understanding the people, the culture, the industries, and just the values that we hold dear. I have had experiences also working in the legislative side of things and the regulatory side that allow me to have some unique qualifications that I think will help me be a great representative for this district.
What do you think when, obviously in a Republican primary, unless it's just 2 Republicans that have a very different view of what being what a Republican is or a conservative is, there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of things that you and your opponent may agree on. What are the things that you disagree on with your opponent, or you think you would do better than your opponent, and why you should, and why the voters should vote for you?
Well, I think boiling it down, I've actually got legislative experience, having worked for the 2 senators and having worked for Texas Cattle Feeders, helping to advocate on behalf of the farmers, the ranchers, the cattle feeders, and the small businesses that are a part of our association. I know how to advocate on the behalf of people in this district, and I understand the process, so I can be a lot more effective from the start. And then the other thing is that I'm born and raising my own family in the district. I'm kind of a homegrown person ready to go, whereas my opponent hasn't lived in the district for over 20 years and has never lived in the district, actually, because, he continues to say Levelland's in the Panhandle, but all of us that live here know that Levelland's actually in South Plains.
Right. When it comes to there was an article that came out this week, and I asked your opponent about it yesterday, and I'll ask you about it today. The article said that when you were, I guess you were a lobbyist at this time, that you lobbied to continue NAFTA and oppose the Trump administration on country of origin labeling. What was your thought process behind that, and where do you stand today on those?
Well, the article itself is completely misleading and untrue, and it's a perfect example of how neither my opponent nor the publication that drafted this article understand the issues that were taking place then. And I'm proud of the work that I've done for Texas cattle feeders. And what we were talking about then was two things. At that point, USMCA didn't exist, and we wanted to continue the good things that NAFTA had done for the farmers and the ranchers and the cattle feeders in this district and a number of other people in this district. Mexico and Canada are two of our biggest markets for beef and other products that we produce here. So we would for certain not want NAFTA to go away. But we were working with him to modernize NAFTA, create a new NAFTA 2.0 at that time before it got the name the U.S.-Canada-Mexico Trade Agreement. So what they've done is not understood an issue, taking it out of context and try to make it look like something negative, where we were actually working with the Trump administration. All of the agriculture groups were doing that to put forward a new policy that was going to be beneficial, continue to be beneficial for all of us. And then with regard to country of origin labeling, again, that's one that, having not lived here or worked in our industry, they just don't understand it. So what country of origin labeling was an Obama-era rule that failed, plain and simple. It was just like a number of regulatory attempts by people that don't understand an issue. And when we let the federal government dictate things like this, they get it wrong. And we've seen that time and time again. If you go back to that same time period, that's when Obama was talking about, had drafted the Waters of the U.S. rule that would allow additional federal regulation over waters in our state. Even some areas that were dry were going to be considered waters of the U.S. So this is another example of a failed regulatory scheme that ended up costing our producers billions of dollars without providing any benefit in return, and didn't even provide any information usable to consumers, because under that previous rule that we opposed, it actually exempted half of the product that we produce in the United States, half of the product that we consume in the United States, because it exempted food service. It also was just so burdensome that it cost so much money for segregation of product, having affidavits, because I actually, as a U.S. producer, would have had to prove that my product, I had to have an affidavit that I gave to the feed yard, and the feed yard would have an affidavit that they gave to the packer that said, these are U.S. cattle. Well, we had to prove up our own origin of our own product when it was raised right here in the 13th district. So it just didn't work. What we have advocated for, what I have advocated for, is a voluntary program that lets us in the marketplace dictate the terms of how we're going to develop this program, that actually has the potential to provide a premium to the producer, and we can label it with a big U.S. flag and a Texas flag and have a product, because we know we're proud of our product, but have one we can market
right,
and show where it comes from. And then we also are providing information the consumer wants to know, and that's the goal of the program. But having the government do it, it costs us all money rather than achieving the goal that we want, which is to make us more money.
Visiting with Josh Winegarner, candidate in Texas 13, Republican runoff on July 14th, and they've got a debate tonight in Wichita Falls. Josh, just as a question about campaigning, with the coronavirus and everything else that's been going on. How has that changed what you and the campaign have been able to do, or has it changed much of what you've been able to do?
Yeah, Chad, before I answer that, I want to say one more thing about country of origin labeling.
Sure.
And this is important. The Trump administration has opposed mandatory country of origin labeling. Secretary Sonny Perdue has said on a number of occasions, including testimony in front of Congress, that he opposes it and we will not see it. We need to develop a new system. So, again, I think this just goes to my opponent and the advocacy group that wrote this story just don't know what they're talking about.
Okay.
With regard to the campaign, I think your question was about campaign and COVID and how things have changed.
Yeah, it's just for me. It's just obviously things have changed. The door to door knocking and everything else. I don't know how well that does in today's times. And just personally, I was just kind of wondering how it's changed the campaign.
Well, it has changed significantly, and right after we started to see the COVID spikes, we made a conscious decision in the campaign to change from doing what we would normally be doing to how can we utilize our resources and our volunteers to help our communities. And we were able to do that by providing resources on our webpage for people if they needed help. We also provided information on how you could sign up to volunteer and a way for people that needed assistance to contact us, and we would hook them up with a volunteer that could help do something. And one of the things that came out of that just shows who we are in this district in our area of the country is I called one of the volunteers and said, hey, there's a lady that has asked if we can get her some groceries from the food bank. Can you run over and pick those up for her? And his response was, and this was in Wichita Falls, his response was, no, but I'll run down to United and I'll buy her some and I'll take them to her.
There you go.
That's just the mentality of the people in this district. When we see a need, we're going to address it. We're going to take care of it ourselves, and we're going to protect each other. So that's something that's I'm very proud of. And then we were able to also had some volunteers that had extra PPE, so we were able to deliver some masks to the testing site in Amarillo, delivered some gowns up to Dumas to the hospital district when they saw their spike. Just continue to be a resource. We did a pop-up food pantry, and in fact, I think that one was in Amarillo. There was one in Lubbock. The church I belong to, Hillside, was part of that, along with a number of the agriculture producers, where we gave away 60,000 pounds of food, ground beef, potatoes, milk, cheese, eggs, to 2,000 people that needed it. And I think there was one of those also in Lubbock. There have been a few in other places. Now there's going to be one in Canyon coming up soon. So just continuing to be a help to the community.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. And then as far as the campaign itself went, we continued to campaign. We continued to have contact with voters, but we obviously had to do it a different way. So we utilized technology, utilized direct phone calls. We talked to people through Zoom meetings, just continued to be out and about as much as possible, but also not being to where people said, hey, why are you in my face?
Right. Hey, Josh Winegarner, we've got to get going. Tell folks what your website is, where they can get more information about you and your campaign, and any other social media pages you want to plug.
Sure. My name is Josh Winegarner. Our website is joshwinegarner.com. It's got all the information on how to contact me, and I just want everybody to know that I'm a strong pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and we got to finish building the border wall and protecting our country from the drug traffickers and the human traffickers that keep coming in. And I appreciate the time on your show, Chad, and I look forward to talking with more and more voters. And
we'll get you on again soon.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Josh Winegarner, Republican candidate, Texas 13, that July 14th runoff race. It's heating up.